My name is Brenda, and this is History Coles Notes, so let's get started. King Henry VIII ruled between 1509 to 1547 and was known for presiding over the beginnings of the English Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation. But it was his love life and not his politics that he's most known for. Most importantly, he is most well known for how those relationships ended. King Henry had 6 wives and a whole lot of mistresses. His political plans for unification and keeping power in his family drove him to annul marriages and have 2 of his wives beheaded. His dramatic love life created a situation of unstable succession for the throne, foreign policy implications, and eventually it led to a break with the Church of Rome. So who were these ladies caught up in this mess? Well, Henry took the throne at the age of 17 in 1509. 6 weeks later, he married Catherine of Aragon, who was the daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, and the widow of his older deceased brother Arthur. From the second that Henry said, "I do," he was obsessed with producing an heir, which back then meant a son. You see, girls didn't count in the line of succession during these times, so after multiple pregnancies and several births, Henry started to panic when the only child to survive was a daughter named Mary, and she was born in February of 1516. Since there was no son, Henry's eyes started to wander, and they settled on one of his wife's ladies-in-waiting. Her name was Elizabeth Blunt, and in 1519 she was taken away from court in secret to give birth to a boy named Henry Fitzroy, who was the king's only acknowledged illegitimate son. But at that time, illegitimate meant you're not in the line for the throne. So by 1520, Henry's eyes started to travel around again, and eventually they looked onto a lady who was in waiting to the queen again. And her name was Anne Boleyn, and she was not interested in being just a mistress. She wanted to be a queen. So Henry, who was enraptured with Anne, went to the Pope for approval to annul his marriage from Catherine. He said that his marriage was not valid since her previous marriage to his brother was consummated, but Catherine said that wasn't true. So the Pope, he refused Henry's request, and so the king decided to divorce her anyway without the approval of the Roman Catholic Church. How did he do this? Well, he just established the Church of England, which he made sure they would allow him to get an annulment. The unintended consequences of this was that it ushered in a religious reformation for his kingdom. So Henry and Anne got married in January of 1533, and to that marriage, Henry brought in a little bit more baggage just than an annulled marriage. Anne was well aware that after her and her sister Mary spent part of their childhood in the French court, Henry met Mary when they returned. They had an affair, but he soon became smitten with Anne. The same year Anne and Henry were married, they had their first child together. But it was a girl, again, and her name was Elizabeth. But Anne believed that she would have a son soon enough. After a series of stillborn births, Henry lost interest in his latest wife and, well, he took a mistress. And she became enraged, and she plotted with her sister-in-law to have her removed from court. By this time, Henry had enough, and he accused his wife of adultery, treason, and incest with her own brother. He had this marriage annulled, and to make sure no other issues popped up, he just had her beheaded on May 19th, 1536. Now, most historians believe that Henry fabricated the charges against Anne just to speed up his timeline. What timeline? Well, just days after Anne's execution, Henry married his third wife, Jane Seymour. She was part of the pool of women that Henry usually targeted, which were the ladies-in-waiting for the queen. Now, Jane served in capacity not only for Anne, but for Henry's first wife, Catherine, also. And to make this even more complicated, Jane and Anne's mother were cousins who shared the same grandmother, and they were raised together for a time. Jane must have been aware that Anne found out about the affair and that she wasn't going to step aside. In fact, sources say that the 2 women came to blows multiple times in court, fighting over their man. But in the end, it just didn't matter. Anne lost her head, and Jane, she died from complications giving birth to Henry's son Edward, who was born on October 12, 1537. It seems that giving birth to a boy put Jane in a very special place in her husband's heart. At his request, Jane lays at rest beside her husband to this day. Now, after enjoying the single life for a couple of years, Henry decided it was time he settled down again after it was suggested he made a political alliance by marrying one of two sisters of Germany's Duke of Cleves. Henry asked for portraits of the two women to be sent to him, and he picked the one he thought was hotter. Her name was Anne of Cleves, and she arrived in England to get married on January 1st, 1540. And when she did, Henry was not a happy man. She didn't look like the portrait, so in typical Henry fashion, he tried to stop the wedding. He didn't succeed, so the two were wed 5 days after she arrived. Henry quickly jumped back into his pattern of having affairs, but this time Anne was lucky. Henry asked for a divorce, and she said, "Sure, sounds like a great plan." She kept her head, and she lived the rest of her days out in peace with a very generous divorce settlement. Now, this opened the door for Henry to marry again, and her name was Catherine Howard, and you have one guess where Henry found her. She was a lady of waiting for Anne of Cleves. She was 19 years old and was said to be very rambunctious, if you know what I mean. Meanwhile, Henry was now overweight and unable to walk. Even so, he was delighted by his new hot young bride. He showered her with gifts until her rambunctiousness came a little too much. Rumors started that Catherine was cheating on Henry, and they started to surface throughout the court. With enough evidence being available that she was promiscuous, Henry had the hangman sharpen up his axe, and Catherine was executed for adultery and treason on February 13th, 1542. Now, about 5 months later, Henry married again. Seriously, girls, why would you marry this guy? But the sixth wife was named Catherine Parr, and she was said to be highly spirited and very well educated, and a widow when she caught Henry's eye. The problem was that Henry didn't like smart girls. When Catherine started showing interest in the Protestant religion, Henry had her arrested, but she somehow managed to avoid the fate of her predecessors, and she brought a stability and a peace to court. She was also very kind and loving to Henry's children. She was a great stepmother, and it was said that eventually Henry calmed down and he started to listen to his wife for a change. Historians believe that Catherine had the most influence on Henry's decisions in a variety of areas, including court culture, the role of women, religion, and the education of Henry's children. She also convinced Henry to restore his daughter Mary and his daughter Elizabeth back to their status in their line of succession, and she even acted as regent when Henry went to war with France. She outlived her husband by 1 year when she passed away in 1548. Now, the irony in all this, with all Henry scheming to have a son, Edward actually did take the throne eventually. He was crowned at the age of 9, and immediately factions started to develop around the boy king and his regent, which was the Duke of Somerset. In January of 1553, Edward started showing signs of tuberculosis, and by May, it was evident that this disease would be fatal. So Edward immediately attempted to cut both of his sisters out of the line of succession, and he put Lady Jane Grey in their place. As a result, a power struggle took place, and Jane ruled for 9 days before the sisters stood together against Jane. She was overthrown, and Mary became the first woman to take the throne in her own right. She rejected the break with Rome caused by her father and the establishment of the Protestant religion by her brother's regents. She is most known for returning the English church to Roman jurisdiction while reviving the heresy acts. This led to the execution of many of the Protestant faith. When Mary believed she was pregnant, she changed her will so her husband would become the next regent when their child was underage. But here's the thing, she wasn't pregnant. She thought she was due in March of 1558, but when no child was born, she was forced to accept the fact that her sister Elizabeth would take the throne when she would pass. By May of that year, Mary was very weak and ill by what some experts believe was ovarian cysts or maybe uterine cancer. She died at the age of 42, passing the crown to her sister Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth would be the last monarch of the House of Tudor when she died without an heir, but her reign brought in an age which historians believe is the golden age of English history. During her reign, there was no drama like her dad. She considered herself married to the nation, and during this time, England experienced a peace and prosperity while arts flourished. It seems to me that Henry should have forgotten about sleeping around so much to have a son and looked towards his daughters, who ruled in ways that he never would have thought of. Now, thank you guys so much for watching today, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell so you can join us for more History Coles notes. Be sure to check out all the other amazing content that we have on the Horrifying History channel, and be sure to follow us on social media. It's there where you'll be the very first to hear about what's coming up in the Horrifying History universe, and there's a lot of new stuff coming up very soon. You can find links to our social media in this show's notes. Thank you all for watching again today, and until next time.